Inside Crime is brought to you by Deterra. The Deterra drug deactivation system helps stop opioid misuse before it starts. With Deterra, unused prescription opioids and other drugs are gone for good. I'm Angeline Hartman. I've spent my career as a journalist covering some of the worst crimes in history. My craft is storytelling. My passion is crime fighting. Now I'm bringing you more stories, candid conversations with crime victims, their families, and law enforcement. We'll journey together as we learn what happens inside crime. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside Crime. I'm very excited about our guest today. When we're talking about crime-fighting journalists, Billy Jensen is at the top of the list. Billy has spent many years as an investigative journalist, and now, using his digital media skills, he's directly helping solve homicide cases for police departments. He's becoming known as sort of a digital consulting detective. The work he's doing is pretty cool, so we'll talk to him about that and several other cases. But first, let's talk about his connection to one of the biggest stories in 2018. After 40 long years, there was a big break in an unsolved case in California. From 1976 to 1986, a serial killer and rapist terrorized victims from Sacramento to San Francisco to Los Angeles. We're talking about the Golden State Killer. Back in April, the suspect was finally identified and arrested in Sacramento, California. He's a 72-year-old man, Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, if you can believe that. Investigators say DNA technology and the use of public genealogy databases linked DeAngelo to the crimes. When cops announced the big arrest, a true crime book published 2 months prior was mentioned at the press conference. The book is called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Cops said that book helped reignite public interest in the decades-old cold case, which was very important. The author of that book was a freelance writer and crime blogger, Michelle McNamara. 2 years ago, Michelle passed away suddenly. It happened in her sleep. She was 46 years old. At the time of her death, her book was unfinished, and Billy Jensen worked with Paul Haynes, a researcher, and Michelle's husband, Patton Oswalt, to complete Michelle's book. They published it, and it was a big success. HBO decided to turn the book into a documentary series, and it was at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. All of this is just an incredible story on top of a very remarkable case.
The evil acts attributed to the Golden State Killer defy imagination. 12 murders, 45 rapes, 120 burglaries between 1976 and 1986.
Sometimes he would call victims he left alive to torment them, disguising his voice with clenched teeth.
He took his victims' wedding rings and bikini photos as souvenirs. Why the Golden State Killer's attacks apparently stopped in 1986 remains a mystery.
Tonight, hiding in plain sight, police say one of the most elusive serial killers in American history has been captured outside his suburban home.
We found the needle in the haystack.
Welcome to Inside Crime, my friend Billy Jensen.
Hi, how you doing?
Superstar investigative journalist.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm very happy to be here.
Billy, how do you fit it all in? That's my number one question.
It's you have to be able to, when you're working on, and a lot of people have different jobs. This is the kind of job that there's never really a chance to take a break because there's always another crime
right
to go after. There's always another missing person. There's always another unidentified remains. So there's never a time when you're sort of like, well, it's all done, and I think that's what drives me, is that there's always going to be something else out there. There's always another thing that's out there. You're never going to be done, which is unfortunate. And some people have asked me, wouldn't it be great, what would happen if there was no crime? I was like, I would love it if there was no crime. I would go and I'd build theme park rides or something. I would not be doing, I'd be very happy not to have to do this for a living. But unfortunately, the state of the world and the way it is, this is what I do.
Well, you've got so many different projects going right now, and you've helped so many people over the years. I just want to start out by letting people know, like, how did this evolve? How did you get into all this?
Well, it started, it probably started with the Kennedy assassination, and I'm not that old. But,
I was going to say.
Yeah, no. I had watched a TV show called The Man Who Saw Tomorrow, which is about Nostradamus, and forget about all that stuff about him, predicting anything. But it had this whole thing about the Kennedy assassination and all the forensics around the Kennedy assassination. Right after I saw that, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I went right to the library and started getting books out and getting books about the Kennedy assassination. Then it moved from there, and I fell into being a sports writer, and I would write about hockey fights. And I had a zine about hockey fights, and I was just very interested in just offbeat sports stories.
Uh-huh.
But I always wanted to do crime, but I just didn't have the pedigree for it yet. So I was constantly saying, hey, can I do crime? And I started writing for the Village Voice when it was out on Long Island. But they kept saying, no, just stick with the sports. You're doing great with the sports. And
there's more
but
to
eventually, actually, it was the New York Times who were looking for stringers on the weekend. And they gave my editor gave them my name and said, all right, with 3 words of warning, which was just accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. And this was even before I had a cell phone, so I'd have to go report the story and then go to, call in, rewrite find a payphone, which you don't find very many of them now these days. And that was sort of my entry point into crime, and that was in 1999. And then sort of ever since, and I made the decision very early on in that career that I wasn't going to be a beat reporter because I didn't want to do crimes that were solved. I wanted to do crimes that were unsolved. I wanted to push the narrative forward and help people. And it was not, when I was doing crimes that were already solved, or it just felt very exploitative to me, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
So
you were always drawn to it even early on in your career.
Yeah, that has definitely hampered me as far as my career goes. It definitely didn't let me go on that path of being a beat reporter, because you can't pick your own stories. If an editor says go do a story, I'm not going to say no if I was a reporter. So I had to do that. So I went off and became an editor so I could pick my own stories. So I would run newspapers, but then be able to say, you know what, there's an unsolved story. I think I want to do that one. And then it went from there, and it's writing about unsolved murders. And then I got involved with the parents of murdered children. I became a murdered media advisor for them. And, parents and family members would contact me and say, my son died. He was murdered 4 years ago. How do I get the case back into the public eye? That kind of thing. And then I would help them out with that. And I would write certain stories about it. And then everything just, started to snowball. And as I got to be a better writer and a better investigator, I started, doing all different types of stories. And then eventually, as the writing was on the wall for newspapers and magazines, I came out to Hollywood and started to do true crime TV.
So much has happened with you just in the last couple of years, even just in the last 6 months, right?
Yeah, the six months, obviously, after, my friend Michelle McNamara was writing a book about the Golden State Killer, and she passed away suddenly. And my second thought after thinking about her daughter was, who's going to finish this book? So I volunteered to finish the book, and I worked on it with her researcher, Paul Haynes, and with her husband, Patton. And we got the book out, and she was just such a great writer. I couldn't even write my own stuff while I was working on her book, just because it was so intimidating reading her stuff, because she's really good.
Yeah. Well, and at what point was she halfway done with the book, Billy? Or
no, she was more than halfway done.
More than halfway.
She wrote it She wrote it in chapters, in segments. She wasn't writing it linearly, so it was really more of a puzzle of putting what to put where, and then put some sort of ligament tissue in between. And then there was a section at the end of the book that me and Paul wrote to kind of tie things together and show, hey, where can this investigation go? And I said, let's focus on two things. There's going to be two ways that this guy's going to be caught, and it's going to be geographic profiling or familial DNA. So I took the familial DNA part. He took geographic profiling. The book comes out in February, and then in April, they had caught him.
So you took that part in February, and at the same time, what's happening on the investigative side?
Yeah.
Well,
I took that part maybe a year and a half ago when I was writing it.
Right.
It takes a long time for books to come out. While that was happening, Paul Holes, who worked a lot with Michelle on the book, had gotten, he had worked with a genealogist, and they had entered the DNA that they had, because they actually did have a good amount of DNA from this suspect, the Golden State Killer, who had killed at least 13 people and raped at least 49 or 50 women. And they entered it into a public genealogy database called GEDmatch. They were able to get a third cousin and just kept on narrowing it down from there, and were able to find the suspect, who we have to call a suspect right now, Joseph James D'Angelo. So, and actually the night that we were actually all in, myself and Paul and Gillian Flynn, the author, and Patton, we were all in Chicago, in basically Michelle's hometown, or the closest place that we could do the book reading for her hometown, when it was happening. So we were all together when they were actually arresting him, and we didn't even know it. Yeah.
What? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was actually the first time that the HBO documentary series had met us. And it was such a weird feeling, because the HBO documentary series, and Liz Garbus, who is the director, she came in, she starts filming us, and she got us at least she has, a few hours of us before we knew he was caught. For this documentary that's coming out for HBO, or docu-series that's coming out for HBO. And, I found out at midnight, and everybody's in the same hotel. And I was like, do I wake up Patton, and what do I do? And this and that. And, I had to, just because I didn't know whether she would want to shoot it or not, I had to text Liz and say, I know we just met 6 hours ago, and I'm not crazy, but I think this case might be solved. I didn't want her thinking, God, what did I get myself into? This guy's going to be texting me all hours of the night thinking this case has been solved. I said, no, this is not a drill. I think this is really, really happening.
This is not a drill.
It was crazy. And then from there, you had a lot of people obviously coming to you. And I've been working on, when I do true crime, like I said before, only doing unsolved. And that's that limits you. There's a certain television network that devotes itself to true crime, but they won't do unsolved crimes for the most part. And Oxygen's a little different. They will do some unsolved crimes, but most of them want it tied up. They want it in a nice little bow. So that has hampered me as trying to get into TV. I mean, luckily I became a supervising producer on Crime Watch Daily and was able to do, we did a lot of unsolved crimes on there. But now it seems like with this solve, things are opening up a little bit. I think they realize that people want to be part of the search.
They do.
And
you know what?
Yeah, and this was a book that became a bestseller before it was solved. So I think that's proof of that. When we talk about familial DNA, and you knew there was going to be some sort of backlash when it comes to privacy, and but and certain people contacted me afterwards, and asked me, how bad is it? How bad is the backlash? It's not that bad at all, because who's going to want to be on the side of a guy that, killed at least 13 people and raped at least 50 women? And, it was very strange too, when I started working on that, or when I got the news and when I figured out sort of myself while I was doing searches that this is probably the guy, my brain sort of switched and I just didn't care about any of the old crimes. It was all about where else has he been? And I need to build a timeline and figure out where this guy has been before, because I'm sure he's done more stuff. It's not just these crimes that are considered in the canon of the Golden State Killer or East Area Rapist or Original Night Stalker. This guy has probably done more, and we need to find out where he's been.
So where are we with that? What is the latest in terms?
It's been very difficult because he was not that nice of a guy, and it's hard to find people that knew him and liked him that he would share stuff with. Unfortunately, I tracked down a couple of his Army buddies or his Navy buddies, and they had recently passed. But it's gonna, there's gonna be a lot of digging around that. Obviously, you have the prosecution side that wants to button down everything they have for the crimes that they're going after him for now, and that case is going to take a long time to go to trial. But you also have other people coming forward, and people have come to me, and I've talked to people who have said, this is the guy that attacked me. It was just in a different circumstance than we've seen before. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out about this guy. It's just a matter of, there's so much stuff to sift through anyway. Like when I was working on the book, I would always say to myself, why couldn't she have left me a book with, Black Dahlia or something, just something with one crime or one or two crime scenes. She was working on something with, almost 100 crime scenes and all these different documents and all these different theories. And, but that's why she was so obsessed with the case. It was there were so many clues, and how could they not find this guy? And that was the biggest thing that kind of boggled her mind. Is like, how is this guy still free after he did things that were he was the boogeyman way more than the Zodiac Killer or Berkowitz or Jack the Ripper. I mean, he was going inside people's homes where they felt like they were the safest and doing these things. And
kind of just taunting them. I mean, he's like just a sick person, calling them afterwards.
This was all about power. And everybody usually says it, but this was about power and also escape. Whenever he got close to being caught, he would always change it up. He would not go to that neighborhood again. I mean, he had this compulsion or whatever you want to call it to do it, but this right behind that was his need for escape and his ability to escape. And he was a master at that, obviously. But for him, it was more about, it was less about the bloodlust, it seems like, for him, than it was about at least the sex/power. And I don't know whether his bloodlust would have been satisfied by the time, 86 rolled around. He was learning about DNA. DNA had just been used in a criminal case, and he might have said, I need to stop. And that instinct to escape overpowered that bloodlust, and he was able to stop. I don't know.
It's weird, like, to think that after all of those crimes that he could even control himself to stop,
That's why so many people thought, and we had gone through, and I know Michelle had gone through, going through prison records, going through I think one of the last texts I sent her was, were there any break-ins or any peeping Toms that were shot and killed around the time period that he stopped, and going through all those. And she had said, yes, I'm actually just looking at that right now. Everybody thought that he must be dead, or he must be in jail somewhere, maybe overseas or something,
I just, when somebody has such a thirst for that kind of, killing power, I just don't see it stopping. So
yeah. It's weird, but BTK stopped. Dennis Rader stopped.
Right.
And he started again because his kids had moved out. This was empty nest syndrome, and he didn't start again killing, but he started. He liked the taunting of the police as well, and he went back and said, what, I remember, what did I used to do before I had kids, or what did I used to do when I had more time? And it was, I used to kill people and taunt the police. So let me start taunting the police again. And that was his downfall. He very well could have gotten away with it forever, but he just couldn't help himself.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful tribute to Michelle. After all of your work, for things to just come together and to finally get answers.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I'm not that spiritual of a person, but there was definitely some, and Michelle had always said, it's chaos, be kind. She didn't believe in the thing that my mother believes in, which is everything happens for a reason. But there was a lot of weird stuff going on, particularly that week, and a lot of weird coincidences and things that that makes that week incredibly kind of, I don't want to say magical, but just very, very surreal.
You mean the week that he was arrested?
The week that he was arrested,
like signs for you.
Yeah, I always felt it would be solved, but I thought, 4 years down the road, and when there would be some opening up of certain genealogy rules, maybe 23andMe or Ancestry.com would consider opening up their stuff to genealogy, because we knew that the answer was probably lying in those databases, because those databases are so much bigger than GEDmatch.
Mm-hmm.
So we had his DNA. We knew we could get a whole genome of his DNA, and we knew that the answer was behind this locked door. All right, well, where else do we go from here? And then luckily, a third cousin was wanted to know more about genealogy and uploaded their sample to GEDmatch, and then that's why it was there.
And what was the time frame of that? How quickly did we get an answer?
I think when they got the hit, it might have been January.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, January or February. And then it's just a matter, then it goes to police work. And then it's a matter of trying to find out. And they had a little bit easier of a time than if they were going for a crime that happened right now, because they did know the age of the guy, because it did happen so long ago. So they could wipe out a lot of people. So they knew that they were searching for somebody that was, 65 or older, probably something around there, 60 or older, maybe, that was in Northern California at the time. So, they were able to, they get a list of all these people that matched up, and then they're just crossing off names. And at the end of the day, they find this guy, and then they had to be sure. So they went and got his DNA and then matched the two together. And the way they got that was, they were waiting for him to discard something.
And sure enough, he did.
Mm-hmm, sure.
When you mentioned earlier about unsolved crimes versus, crimes that have been solved, and how, what people want. I heard Keith Morrison from Dateline doing an interview recently, and they'd said to him, all the crimes that you guys do on Dateline are, they're all wrapped up, they're finished. And he says, well, basically, that's what people want, because our research shows they don't want to be left hanging. They want an answer in their hour or, 2 hours.
Right.
So I think that's very interesting. But the people I talk to, they want to be
what research do they really do? I mean, did they have 6 people in a room in Las Vegas and say, hey, watch this one and watch this one and say which one you like? It's the human condition does say that if you're going to devote 2 hours to something, you're going to want an ending to it. But I think that was one of the great things about Michelle's book, is that this became a #1 New York Times bestseller, and it didn't have an ending. And I was very cognizant of that when I was working on it, because my stories never have endings.
So, Billy, what I want to talk about is basically this volunteer effort that you have taken on to solve unsolved murders using your expertise in digital media.
Yeah.
I mean, is that like, wow.
It was kind of an epiphany moment when I thought, because during the day, I do a lot with digital media. And then at night, I write my true crime stories. And that was the moment when I said, well, wait a minute, I think I could merge these two together. And it was a matter of a case in Chicago where they had a pretty clear video of the man who had struck a man who then died, and they couldn't find him. They couldn't find him for months. And I said, you know what? I think I can find this guy. And what I do is I use Instagram, I use Twitter, and I use Facebook. And I create pages, and I write them not like a cop would. I write them very conversational, and I write ads. And the ads, and the way, what I can do is I can find any and put this ad in front of, hey, have you seen this guy? Put that in front of anyone within a 1 mile radius of where the crime might happen, or where I think somebody might know who perpetrated the crime, just to get that picture out there. Media has become so fragmented now that, before, when you only had 3 TV stations, 20 years ago, if you had a picture of somebody, or 30 years ago, if you had a picture of somebody had a good chance that they would see it on the 6 o'clock news if all 3 stations were running it. Nobody watches the news anymore, unfortunately. Nobody reads the newspaper. And even if a police department puts it on Facebook, people aren't going to see it. If a news station, even if they have 1 million followers, when they post something, only about 4 or 5% of those followers will see it. And you don't know if those are going to be the right ones and going to be in that neck of the woods. So what I do is I can target on Facebook.
You narrow the focus.
Yeah, I narrow the focus, and I can say, you know what, just give me 25 to 54-year-old females in this area. And I can even narrow it down. I can narrow it down to that drive a Ford Focus and that like the TV show The Office or something. It's just whatever I think might work. And Facebook will deliver that ad to them and deliver it, multiple times. I'm basically knocking on everybody's door, but doing it in a very non-confrontational way, because people their guard is down. They're scrolling on Facebook. They're looking at pictures of cats and pictures of their nieces and nephews. And then they see this, and it's not like they're at it's not like they're watching the news and their guard is up, or it's not like they are, you always see the wanted posters that are at the
post office.
Post office. Yeah. It's not like that. They're feeling a little bit more humanity, and they might say, you know what, I think I know that guy. And then they'll write to me. And then my key is that I have to write them back right away, even if it's in the middle of the night, because they might become less truthful later on, and might have second thoughts in it. But obviously everything is all anonymous, and I'll ferry them over to the detectives, and when I know that their tip is good, because I get a lot, and but we've been able to solve a lot of crimes. We're getting close to a dozen now, and it costs money, and it's a lot of police departments don't understand it and don't have the resources to do it. But I've probably spent about $18,000 of my own money doing it.
Money and time, your time,
and the time,
the ads, and the
time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's after having written stories with no endings for close to 20 years. Being able to get some endings for the stories that I'm able to tell now has been pretty satisfying. So the money is well worth it when I'm able to tell the families that, yeah, we were able to get this guy.
Wow, Billy, that is amazing. Almost a dozen. How long have you been doing that now?
I started right after Michelle passed. Actually, it was right like the summer of 2016. So about 2 years. Yeah. But I need to, one of the things that I'm working on now is getting the scope bigger, and trying to get, and that's one of the things, because I do talk about this in the book, is that there could be, this technique can be used on a wider level. The best thing would be if Facebook gave me $1 million, I'd be able to solve probably 1,000 crimes. But
do we need to call Facebook, Billy?
We do need, yes. Can you call Zuckerberg? That's what I was told. He would be on the line with me. But to explain this to police departments and say, this can work. And, now there are certain police departments that know to come to me, but obviously there's 19,000 different law enforcement agencies across the country, and maybe 5 know to come to me now. So, it's got to get bigger, and it's got to scale, as they say in the tech industry. So, that's kind of like what I'm working on now. And it touches, it's all about identifying somebody that you don't know. And it really does touch the unidentified remains, and also the rape kits that have not been tested. I think the biggest horror in the criminal justice system is the non-testing of the rape kits. Not only the non-testing of them, but then what are you going to do with that? Our labs are in bad shape, and there's so many future crimes that could be that are going to happen right now. I mean, think about that right now. There's going to be an attack right now within the next few hours in America where that person has attacked somebody before and his DNA is sitting in a rape kit in some storage locker.
Untested.
That's going to happen. Yeah. That's going to happen tonight. Think about that. That's crazy. But, between that and not to mention the fact of all the unidentified remains that are out there and the fact that there's so many different databases where missing persons and unidentified remains live and they don't match up to each other. There's so much work to be done. And I kind of put this sort of in the same bucket. And those are the big three that I'm concentrating on is, the crimes that are happening recently. And then also, the running the DNA and then doing familial DNA searches after that. And that's some of the stuff that I'm really passionate about and actually, taking about 20 grand from the book and going and offering places that can't afford it, law enforcement agencies that can't afford it and saying, hey, you know what, I'll help you. You have that DNA. I'll help you run that DNA and we'll work with a genealogist and try to find out who the guy is or girl is.
If we could get the word out there, I mean, when we talk about, consulting with families of murdered victims, there's that side, but there's also consultation for law enforcement in how to work with the media and how to use the media to your advantage. And then there's digital media, which is what you are doing for them now. You're solving crimes.
Yeah. And that's the thing is because media, and even though we want to do media outreach and obviously, getting something on TV is big, but it's just not as big as it was back then because especially young people, nobody has cable. If you're under 30, odds are you don't have cable. You are viewing news on your phone and it's going to be selected for you based on your proclivities on social media. This is the way that it's just another way to get to people. And even, I wish I came up with the idea 5 years ago because Facebook was a lot more powerful 5 years ago and it was looked at by young people. Young people don't look at Facebook anymore. They're on Snapchat, which is harder to reach, and Instagram. And Instagram is tied into Facebook. So I do some ads on Instagram, but they don't work nearly as well because you can't share and things. They don't work nearly as well as on Facebook. So, there's that generational gap on Facebook that I see.
You never know. Maybe there'll be a new Facebook for younger people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, 1 million people are trying that now, but it's there's so many bad things that can happen with social media, and this is one of the good things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. When you talk about, you mentioned earlier about unidentified remains, our paths have crossed so many times, Billy, especially me being at the National Center. One of the cases that really, really stumps me. I mean, we call it the Barrows case, but it's the Allenstown.
I call it the Allenstown 4 case. You guys call it the Barrows case. Up there, they call it the Bear Brook case because it was in Bear Brook State Park. And it was the case of, in 1985, they found the remains of a woman and a child in a 55-gallon drum in a field, and then didn't know who they were, unidentified, didn't know who killed them. They were both killed with blunt force trauma to the back of the head or backside of the head. 15 years later, State Trooper Cody was walking around that area. He had just been given the case, and then he kind of kicked at a drum because he saw another 55-gallon drum there and opened it up, and turns out that there was 2 more bodies in there.
Inside Crime is brought to you by Deterra. The Deterra drug deactivation system is an independently tested, safe, and environmentally sound solution that permanently deactivates, destroys, and disposes of unneeded pills, patches, liquids, creams, and films right at home. Be part of the solution to reduce drug abuse. Learn more at deterrasystem.com.
"15 years later, State Trooper Cody was walking around that area. He had just been given the case, and then he kind of kicked at a drum because he saw another 55-gallon drum there and opened it up, and turns out that there was 2 more bodies in there.
That's crazy.
Two small children, and it's same cause of death. blunt force trauma to the back of the head. And it is, the idea of an almost complete family unit. And 3 of them were related. And one of the little girls, the middle child, was not related to the other 3. And nobody knows who they were. Boggles people's minds. And the crazy thing about this case is, and as I've been working, I started working on it, I guess 3 or 4 years ago, and went up there. We did a few things on it for Crime Watch Daily, and I walked there was actually a very good citizen detective who works on the case, Rhonda Randall, and I went down to NCMEC and met with you guys and how you were the digital.
Maybe we'd put together the reconstruction.
The digital reconstruction. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And while that was all going on, we didn't realize that it was being tied into another case, and via DNA. It's a very complex case, but it's one of the crazier cases where we have basically a complete family unit, and we don't know who they are, but we know who killed them. We are pretty damn sure that this gentleman named Rasmussen killed them, who also had a ton of other names, and we know that he killed other people as well in the same manner. So in the same way that I'm doing with Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer suspect, with Rasmussen, I'm trying to figure out his timeline and see if there are other unidentified remains or identified remains that died of blunt force trauma to the back of the head that are female, that were in some way, there was an effort made to hide them. And that's what I'm working on right now. There's a case of a woman in a refrigerator found in Northern California that has his earmarks that he very well could have killed her. And we still don't know her identity. So now what we have to do is try to get her identity and then go backwards and try to interview people that knew her and say, do you recognize this guy? Was she ever walking around with this guy? Was she hanging out with this guy? This is the way that this guy operated. And, he was probably one of the most evil serial killer I've ever seen, just because of what he would do. His pattern seemed like he would cozy up to a woman and her children, begin molesting the children, kill the woman, and then use those children to lure in another woman and children.
And move on to the next.
And then move on to the next one. And then once the original children either got too old, he would kill them as well. And then just start the cycle all over again. And I can't think of anything in all the stuff that we have seen that's more evil than that.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this California case, if that is connected to him.
The woman in the refrigerator?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of stuff that she was found with in the refrigerator. And there was one of the things, well, she had jewelry on, she had there was a bag of ice that was only delivered to certain bait shops, and he lived behind one of the bait shops where it very well might have been delivered. So that was interesting as well. When you're talking about the late 70s, when we look at unidentified remains, there's so many that are from that era, because you had a lot of people that really, for the first time in their lives, in the late 60s through the 70s, that were leaving. And it was before, the huge communication, with social media and everything like that. So you had people that would just leave their hometowns and they would go to, hey, I'm going to go find myself, I'm going to do something. And they ran in with the wrong people. And a lot of it happened, particularly in California. So when you're looking at unidentified remains, so many of them happened in, late 70s, early 80s. And which is also considered the golden age of serial killers, because it was at a time when you had people that were messed up, and you had a lot of people that were away from their families and willing to trust people when it was not a good idea to trust them.
Yeah, because we're talking about a time when people were hitchhiking and, headed out to California where it's sunshine all the time and just exploring.
Yeah. And it's, I constantly go through when I'm going, you can look through the database, or you're looking through NamUs, and just do a search for 1979, 1980, and there's just so many. And a lot of times too, they wouldn't be, if somebody went missing, they wouldn't be reported missing, or they were reported missing and it didn't, it got mixed up. It got lost in the shuffle, which you find a lot as well. There was it wasn't computers or anything. It was, somebody wrote on a card, okay, this person is missing. And that was it. And then we also had all these crazy rules and the idea that they couldn't, had to wait 24 hours or 48 hours. I mean, that was a real thing. I mean, that was, people wouldn't jump even with kids. And we know this, that a lot of times law enforcement wouldn't jump. Now law enforcement jumps. If you say a kid's missing, they jump. But back then it was not like that.
Within the last few months, we've seen now how DNA technology and genealogy can make a difference in all of these cases, not only with the Golden State Killer. After that, I think that's what was the marker, right? Everybody paid attention, and then they started dropping like flies after that.
That was it. And then the floodgates were opened. And what's happening is it's going to come down to resources, and it's going to come, but you've got a lot of these samples that are sitting there for cases that aren't as well known. So the most well known ones, we're going to catch those guys. If we do have a good sample. I mean, you even heard, I think it was right after Golden State Killer was caught, they started talking about the Zodiac, and they were going to send in one of the envelopes from the Zodiac and try and figure out some familial DNA and try to get a sample. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere or not, but you take a case like April Tinsley, who was murdered, I believe it was April 1st in the late 88 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and she was kidnapped, she was sexually assaulted, she was murdered, and we covered it on Crime Watch Daily. America's Most Wanted covered it. Mm-hmm. Her murderer had also taunted the police, and I guess the victims of the
community.
Family, the community,
the community, writing letters to the little girls that he said, he was watching them, and
writing on the barn door. He wrote on the barn door, referencing killing her, I believe, at one point. Right. And this case seemed like it was never going to be solved. And, but, they had DNA, from it. And this happened in 88. Not every criminal knew that, there's this DNA thing out there. So criminals were leaving their DNA, as they still are today. And, I know that Parabon, which is a company based in Virginia, I think it was CeCe Moore, who works with Parabon. Yes. She uploaded it to GEDmatch, and then in July, they narrowed it down to these two brothers, and they were able to get this guy named Miller. And they did it the same thing. They found, they waited for him to discard something in the trash and matched up the DNA. And we're just going to see more and more of these. We just have to make sure that the funding is there for it. This was a case, April Tinsley, again, little white girl who, has been a subject of multiple TV programs. There's a lot of other cases and a lot of other people of color who haven't been covered, that their evidence is sitting there, and the evidence of their killers is sitting there in police lockers. We need to get those tested and those into GEDmatch and finding those killers as well.
Yeah. Billy, let's talk about your new book, where it's still in the early stages, right?
No, it's done. I just have to get my edits back and fine tune it. But
okay, so we're getting close.
Pretty good. We're getting close. It should come out. It's going to come out as an Audible original. So it's going to come out as an audiobook first, hopefully in February or early March. It's called Chase Darkness with Me, and
I love that title. I love it.
And it chronicles myself working on these cases that we've been talking about, solving these murders, and also, a lot of the ones that I wasn't able to solve. And, the sort of general progression. There's stuff in it about Golden State Killer and my relationship with Michelle. There's stuff about my relationship with my dad, who was an ex-con, but he really did introduce me to crime and true crime and things. And it's good. It's a good yarn. And then it'll be 4 months after that, it comes out in hardcover from Source Books, and then it'll be everywhere. So I have that, and then I'm also on a podcast called The First Degree, with these two women named Alexis Linkletter and Jack Vanek. And Jack Vanek is from the Lady Gang. And we tackle a murder each week. And these are murders actually that are solved. But the key to this story is we go and we find one person, or people actually now are contacting us, who have been friends with either the victim or the perpetrator at some point. So they are 1 degree away from this case. So as opposed to just knowing about it, you get sort of an inside thing on whether anybody could have sensed that this was going to happen or not. And we've gotten some really different insights that you don't normally see, and really try to make it different and unique. And it's doing really well. It's good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of it's definitely a unique perspective, because they wanted to do a podcast. I said, well, there's a million podcasts out there. How different are we going to make this? Right. So I've got those two things going on, and then we're still doing the documentary about Michelle and I'll Be Gone in the Dark and the Golden State Killer, and a couple other things I can't quite talk about yet that are interesting cases that might be made into TV shows, and just really trying to educate police departments about the system and making sure that we're doing everything we can to solve these crimes.
Billy, what an exciting time for you. I mean, it sounds like you are getting zero sleep and you're all over the place, but I am so happy for you and all of your adventures.
Well, thank you so much. And, anything I can do for NCMEC and the National Center, I always gravitate towards your work and the work at the National Center. And thank you for everything that you guys do.
Yes, thank you for giving up so much of yourself and trying to make the world a better place for all of us, Billy.
Yes. Let's just solve all these murders, not kill anybody anymore, so I can go build theme parks. That's what I would like.
All right. Well, one day at a time, Billy. Thanks again. We will talk to you soon, Billy Jensen.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And that's it for this episode of Inside Crime. For more information related to this show or any of our podcasts, just go to our website, insidecrime.com. You can always send us an email or reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is @AngelineDC. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Angeline Hartman. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode of Inside Crime.